Monday, November 11th, 2024, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So today, we're going to look at the artificial boom that has only helped the top 1%. And I think it's one of the reasons why we had the result in the US election that we've had. And we'll come to that in a minute. And I'm going to refer to an article, actually. It's an opinion piece in the FT that I saw about a week ago. And then I also saw a post on LinkedIn by someone that I've followed now about GDP. That's really interesting. So before I go further, I'd just like to give a shout out to my precious metals dealer affiliates here in the UK. Of course, we work with Gold Investments. If you want to find out more about how to get in touch with them, if you're looking to buy gold and silver, physical gold and silver that is, the details are below in the description. I have a few promo codes. And in the US, you can check out Miles Franklin. All the details are below in the description. Very easy to get in touch with them. So back to this artificial boom. I've recently posted on Twitter or tweeted on Twitter or on X that the Fed cut rates last week by 25 basis points. And that's despite the fact that the stock market is at all-time highs. The economy is supposedly growing at 3% of GDP almost. Unemployment rate is at 4.1. So how come they're cutting rates? What are they concerned about? And the other thing as well, how come the Democrats didn't win a second term for the presidency? There's the old saying, it's the economy, stupid, right? So I think it's because of this artificial nature of what's going on, and it's been pronounced since 2008. So there's this opinion piece here in the FT is by someone called Ruchir Sharma, and he's actually employed by the Rockefeller Foundation, International Rockefeller Foundation. Yeah, sometimes even these people come out with stuff that makes sense. So he says the U.S. economic boom is a mirage. Its lopsided, brittle quality helps explain why so many Americans will cast votes in anger. So he wrote this the day before the election. As you can see, the writer is chairman. They say he's a chair, though. He's chairman of Rockefeller International. His latest book is What Went Wrong with Capitalism. So let's go through it. It says, as the U.S. goes to the polls, its economy looks unusually strong, averaging nearly 3% growth for 9 straight quarters. The country is attracting heavy flows of foreign money, which have helped push its share of the global stock market index well above 60%, a record high. Yet, voters remain pessimistic about their economic and financial prospects. Why? U.S. growth is a mirage for most Americans, driven by rising wealth and discretionary spending among the richest consumers, and distorted by growing profits for the biggest corporations. Times look good, but this growth is lopsided, brittle, and heavily dependent on spending and borrowing by the government, which is typically the lender of last resort. So the fact that the Rockefeller Foundation is speaking about that now, I think it means that it's been overdone, because the reason we're here is most probably partly because of the Rockefeller Foundation. They've been in charge of loads of stuff, of influencing policy for decades. So let's continue though. Although the world marvels at unsinkable U.S. consumers, a growing number are priced out of homes and falling behind on credit card debt. The bottom 40% by income now account for 20% of all spending, while the richest 20% account for 40%. That is the widest gap on record, and it is likely to widen further, says Oxford Economics, a consultancy. Most Americans now spend so much on essentials such as food that they have little left for extras like travel or eating out. So I would say that top 20%, they're doing well, especially the top 10% as well, because asset prices are very high and the richest always own a lot of assets. Discretionary spending is becoming a luxury for the wealthy, and so is optimism. Confidence collapsed during the pandemic and has since recovered much more strongly for the richest third of consumers than for the middle or bottom thirds. The impact of rising wealth on spending is also concentrated among rich consumers who own most of the assets. This decade, booming financial markets added $51 trillion to U.S. wealth, while millennials did especially well. Virtually all their gains went to rich millennials, to a widening wealth gap between young and old, and this new source of division and anger within the younger generation. Increasingly, America is a gilded economy with a shiny but thin veneer in the corporate sphere. The 10 largest companies account for 36% of the stock market cap, a peak since the data began in 1980. The most valuable U.S. stock trades for 700 times more than any stock in the bottom quartile, up from just 200 times 10 years ago, and the widest gap since the early 1930s. As the big grow bigger, anxiety haunts the rest. The share of small businesses expressing uncertainty about the economy and their own futures is unusually high, and their confidence is at lows rarely seen outside recessions. I'm going to stop here and now move over to the GDP calculation by someone I saw posted on LinkedIn. I've connected to him. Hopefully, maybe he will come on the channel, but I have to give him credit for this, Siegfried Spitzer. So here it is, the post, and I'll read it to you, and you see why GDP is really artificial, the GDP calculation. Let's have a look. My metric of true economic growth, money supply adjusted economic growth. He calls it MSAEG. Summary. When adjusting nominal GDP for the rising money supply, I find that from 2008 to the present, there has been on balance no positive money supply adjusted economic growth, particularly in the US. And I'm not trying to bash the US here, but I'm trying to look at the numbers and to see why the US looks so much stronger and healthier economically and financially than all the other countries. And I think one of the reasons is that the US has been able to print and borrow a lot more because it's had the privilege of having the major reserve currency, and that's changing though. So let's have a look here. His approach. You adjust the nominal GDP to account for the increase in the money supply, M2. The reason is that an increase in the money supply can distort the value of money itself, leading to an inflationary environment where the real value of output is actually lower than the GDP numbers. This step would essentially make sure you're factoring in the value destruction caused by currency debasement, inflation, due to the increase in the money supply. So let's get to the numbers here. And I'm going to skip to the US number You can pause the video here and see how he calculated it. And yeah, let's skip to the emperor has no clothes. So from 2008 to third quarter 2024, GDP has increased from 14.715 trillion to 29.35 trillion. So GDP increased by almost 100%, as you can see, 99.46. However, the money supply M2 increased from 7.484 trillion to 21.22 trillion. Well, the increase there is 183.53%. So $1 in 2008 is worth $2.835 in 2024. So you have to divide GDP in 2024 by 2.835. So you get 29.35 divided by that number, 2.835, and you get $10.35 trillion. So the money supply adjusted economic growth was negative. More specifically, 10,000 divided by 14.715 trillion. That was the GDP in 2008. Minus 1, you get minus 29.6%. So yes, that's how much the GDP is being overestimated on a M2 adjusted basis. And I think it's one of the reasons why there's so much anger, especially amongst the, I would say, the bottom 90%, and especially the bottom 50. And that's why the top, especially the top 1%, but also the top 10%, they're doing really well, because what this inflationary policy we've had since 2008 of zero rates and massive QE, that has helped asset prices, and that's helped the top 1% and also especially the top 0.1%. And that's why there's so much anger, I think, and that's why we are where we are, not just in the United States, but here in the UK, the same thing is happening. We see the City of London and the people around the City of London, around politics, doing really well, and the rest of the country really not. Yeah, they're really suffering. And is it any wonder we had those riots earlier this year in the summer? Because Middle England, north of England, they're not benefiting from this sugar rush of fiat currency inflation, and it's the Cantillon effect, right? Richard Cantillon was a friend of John Law back in the 1720s, and he spoke about how the people at the top 1% or top 0.1%, they benefit from the initial inflation, and by the time that money gets to the public, it's become almost worthless. And by that time, the very wealthy, they've bought everything, and that's where you get the anger. So the guy from the Rockefeller Foundation, he didn't talk about GDP adjusted for money supply. And this guy from LinkedIn didn't mention the guy from the Rockefeller Foundation. But I think their two views reflect the same phenomenon, which is fiat currency inflation. Yes, that's making the rich richer and the poor poorer. Am I a socialist? No, I'm for a fair system, and I recognize this because I lived in a country where we had this in spades, and that was Brazil. It's a third world country, and unfortunately, America and Europe are becoming more and more like a third world country. So there you go. Thank you, Siegfried Spitzer, and hopefully you will accept an invitation one of these days to come on the channel. We'll have to see. I haven't asked him yet, But anyway, with that, I'm going to wish you all a very good day and a very good start to the week. Take care. Bye.